Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to do a quick introduction of Dan, and then we'll let him jump straight into it. You can invite somebody to do a more of a formal introduction as well as more of a personal one for Dan tonight. You can't bring somebody like Dan in and not talk about what he's achieved and the great things he's done, but as testament to some of the people that are in the front row and myself, there's also some other great things that have happened as a result of his interactions over the years. So, well, two great things and maybe one not so great thing, but we'll see. So Dan is he's an FIA, and he describes himself as a political and social activist, masquerading as an architect. He's executive director of the Detroit Collaborative Design Center, which is part of the University of Detroit Mercy School of Architecture. They've won several awards over the years. Dan is also a Loeb Fellow from the Harvard GSD. Was also inducted in the College of Fellows, and has many other awards and exhibitions for both his own personal work, but also the work of the center as well. A couple books he's authored. Both of them are up here as well, but the Activist Architecture is also one that you can just go to the center's website, and it's a PDF that's free for download if you're interested in it. It's a great book, so nice offering that they're giving to you. Mm-hmm. On a more personal note, Dan is, and I didn't realize this when extended the invite to him, but it's been 20 years this semester that Dan was a Hyde chair here at University of Nebraska. And it hasn't been back to Nebraska, well, back to Lincoln,
right, since
that time. The culture shift that you guys have seen happening with recent Hyde chairs, Cruz and Natalie, is the same exact sort of thing that we want to have happen with the Hyde chairs. That's the reason why we do it. And Dan did that the time that we were in school. And so, you know, there's a lot of interest that I can trace back to it, and there's a lot of other people that are here as well that have been directly impacted by both Dan's teaching and his interaction, and we just extend our appreciation and our welcome back to Nebraska. So with that, please help me welcome Dan.
Thank you very much.
If heaven ain't a lot like Detroit, I don't wanna go. If heaven ain't a lot like Detroit, I just as soon stay home. If they ain't got no 8 Mile like they do up in the D, just send me to hell to Salt Lake City. It would be about the same to me. It would be about the same to me.
Hi everyone, how are you? I did actually play that when I lectured in Salt Lake City. You should have seen their faces, not so smiley as you are today. I do like, actually it was nice to have Brian do a more personal introduction. Usually they're very stuffy and saying one accolade after another, and so I like you to see that we actually are human. I made all this stuff for my Halloween costume, and somehow there's a connection, but when I was Hyde chair, my study was of tattoos and body modification. I'm happy to talk about how that relates to what I'm doing now offline afterwards. So, with that said, I'm going to be talking tonight about syncopating the urban landscape, the way we think about the work that we're doing in the city of Detroit, and connections to other places as well. I'm a person who likes to diagram everything. So what you're seeing here is the diagram of the lecture. So each of the blue dots here is a main point that you will hear, and then I got a personality, those at lunch kind of figured this out, to just wander and wander, and the blue dots keep me on track. So I will be wandering through projects, essentially giving you a bunch of examples that will ultimately define a way of thinking. Also, these projects will point to bigger things, if you will. It's not about the projects themselves. It's about thinking larger issues. It's about having a different way of seeing. So starting there, if you will, I'd like to give a little background about the office and how we're structured and so on, because it is rather unique. I'll start with a couple of our guiding principles. This, if you will, is our meta principle. This is our economic pyramid. I'm running a little bit out of battery, so hopefully you can see my little pointer there. But at the top, we all know that's the 1%, the 10% or however, and then the base, it's where everyone else is. And this is our design pyramid, flipped on it, that all these people are trying to work for the 1%, and very few are working for the many. So what we're trying to do is essentially take that and try to widen the bottom out a little bit to begin to help create, if you will, a more equitable approach to design and community and people and so on. We'll talk a bit about that as you see some of the work. There are three driving forces, if that's the meta, if you will, there are three driving forces that govern how we operate. The first one is that oftentimes in this work we hear that, oh, you're going to have to settle for mediocre products, and if you do civic engagement, if you bring people into the dialogue, you're going to have to just, the design will suffer. We don't agree with that. We don't think you have to abandon the tools of your discipline to have this sort of inclusive way of thinking. What we talk about is that we have stakeholder expertise and discipline expertise, and we bring that together to create the great designs that we hope that we do. Second thing is, we don't believe in the phrase of giving a voice. Oftentimes you hear that we're giving this neighborhood a voice or this person a voice and so on. We think that that is actually, it's still about a power structure of above. And what we're talking about is how do we, through the work we do, amplify a diminished voice. Because everyone has a voice, it's just that some voices are much, much louder than others. And so we're trying through our work, through the work of design, if you will, amplify the diminished voice. And in the same way, in terms of power, we'll hear that we're empowering this person, empowering that person. Same dialogue. That's about a power structure that where the power is being still held. And so how do we energize the power of a community versus trying to empower a community? And that, one of our partners, Sandra Turner Handy, I would love to take the credit for that phrase. She works on the east side of Detroit, and that's her phrase. So we are part of a school of architecture, the University of Detroit Mercy School of Architecture. We work exclusively with nonprofit organizations, and we're modeled. I've modeled it after what a teaching hospital is to a medical school. We are to a school of architecture. So we operate just like an office. We have 8 full-time people, a couple of business managers and stuff, but what you see here is our, that's me right there. You have our landscape architect, Charles. We have my co-director, Christina. We have an We have architect, Rebecca, Josh, an architect, Sierra up there, an architect. We're all working together on this work. Then students come in each semester and they work alongside the professionals on projects. So instead of having a studio with one faculty and a bunch of students, which is fine, this is modeled because, frankly, Detroit was sick and tired of all these universities coming in and doing work and then leaving and nothing, and sort of never seeing them again. So they see us all the time. We remain in the community and we work year after year. We don't stop when a project's over. So the students may change, but the faces they work with day to day stay the same. So if you notice the number of years we've been there, Charles has been with us 9 years. This is actually, I should update this, it's my 20th year this year. So the years, that's part of the reason why we're showing the years. This is all the people that work with us since I've been there. And the little red, I had to make it red, is the University of Nebraska student that following their time here came through us and worked with us before he went to Columbia for grad school. We have 30 schools represented that have worked full-time in our office as co-op. So it's not just our students, though of course we give priority to our students because they're required to do a co-op. These are the 2 books that are referenced. They're free online. Architects don't do books to make money, so I don't know why we constantly try to charge for them. So we're not going to get any of it, so we're not giving it to other people. So you can download these for free. The physical books, yeah, you can pay for printing, but that's it. But the download's much better because you get the videos and things that are part of them. Okay, let's get started. Great design. For us, great design is an essential human need. This isn't something that we mean superfluous. We really mean, like food and water, it's an essential human need. What do we mean by that? I don't mean that only great design is what you need to survive. So if you only had food and with no water and no air, you would die. If you only had water with no food and no air, you would die. So if you only had great design, you would die too. So what do I mean by that? Is that no one would argue that a child in a poorly designed elementary school develops differently than a child in a well-designed elementary school. So wouldn't that then translate to that's part of what we need to grow? Then why aren't our homeless centers designed better? Why aren't our substance abuse centers designed better? Why aren't our communities designed better? And so on. We need to be thinking about all of that because that influences who we are and how we respond as adults and people and citizens. So, but design for us is not just things. Design is more than that. It's processes, it's systems, it's relationships and experiences. We get involved with all of that. You'll see some things, of course, because that's what you can show, but I'll sort of reference systems and relationships that we work with, processes and so on. But for now, because the topic of this talk is syncopating the urban landscape, it's drawn from music. In music, syncopation takes the stronger beats and makes them weaker, and takes the weaker beats and makes them stronger. What does that mean? So for example, in a strong beat, 4-beat would be boom, 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 boom. In a syncopated beat, it would be ba, 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 ba. So it's actually the distance between each beat's the same, but what the upbeat is emphasized versus the downbeat, taking the weaker and making it stronger. How does that translate into, if you will, architecture, into the physical world? This is a weaker note, if you will. A weaker note of abandoned house that Tyree Guyton has begun to tag. Can that, through change, through thinking, turn that into, instead of seeing it as, do we fully renovate it or partially renovate it, could we turn it into a band shell? We work with a local elementary school and a community organization to take this house, strip it entirely empty, except for the side walls. What you see in the orange is the side wall, the side material being taken out and then reconstructed with using cheap garage door hardware to make the stage. So all these little things can either go up, slide over, to create the opening of the stage. And then these 3 empty lots were turned into the park. So this is what it looks like here. This is the project's now a little old, so I'm just showing it to illustrate the idea of syncopation. This project we're doing right now is taking an old abandoned community center that the city was going to demolish, and we tried to convince that you don't need to demolish the whole building. The community was fighting against it, but they were fighting because it's not that they needed this whole thing, though it would have been nice to renovate it, the funds weren't there, but there was a representation of community heritage. So how can we preserve and celebrate the heritage in perhaps a creative way? So we worked with Speckman Massa Michaels, landscape architects did all the landscape around it, and then we began to design what that will be, which was, what if we began to deconstruct it? This was the more expensive option by leaving that wall, but you would need structure for it. If you only had that wall and let the staircase and these 3 racquetball walls and the bridge become the structure to hold it up, then the community fell in love with this idea, thinking that's what we just wanted, some remnant that keeps our heritage of our place. So this was the resulting design. It still has a ways to go. It's more of a schematic. So return to the idea of what does it mean to bring people into a process. This cliche, like minds seldom create new ways of thinking, right? We know it's a cliche. If we unpack it a bit, we begin to say, how do we think with a variety of people? We have a country that uses the melting pot, and I'm going to show an image in a minute about this, a melting pot. What does a melting pot do? It creates gray. Things are mixed together. Individuality is not celebrated. When you think of a mosaic is a thing where each individual tile retains identity while still creating a bigger picture. So if we think of communities in this way, that each person can have individual identity while still having impact on the community, that's different than the narrative that we consistently hear. I was saying that in a community meeting, and a person came up afterwards and said, "Don't you mean it's more like a tapestry?" And I said, "Yes, I love tapestries too. What do you mean by that?" And she said, "Because the front of the tapestry looks beautiful, but the back looks like hell." And that's exactly right. We're not naive. We're not trying to say, "Oh, why don't we just all get along and everything will be fine." It takes a lot of work. We're in even more difficult times now. How do we begin to actually truly celebrate this in the work we do, but understand that it takes a lot of work? So, to begin to parse that out a bit more, we hear this phrase often, civic engagement, civic engagement. For us, that is actually something we as architects don't do, though we are asked to do it by foundations all the time, especially in our work. What we do is civic participation, which is episodic. Engagement is systems, and participation is episodic. So in other words, what we do as architects is design participatory activities that interact with existing engagement systems. So for example, an existing engagement system could be a block club. They're there working together in a community when a project begins, when a project ends, after the project ends, when the new project begins, when the project ends, and so on. They're there continuously, whether there's a project or not. We as architects, we start and end with a project. Now we become more ingrained in our work than that, but there's nothing wrong with this. I'm not suggesting that what we should do that, because that's false. That's hard to do. So if we acknowledge this, then it actually becomes more authentic and transparent on how we work. And then suddenly we say, what are you doing? How can we be part of your agenda versus asking them to be a part of our agenda? So ultimately, it's about relationships. How do you begin to form more and more relationships? You meet someone for the first time, you don't know them. You know them for that first time. You don't know their deep personality and so on. To make that point very quickly, I could spend a lecture or two just talking about this. This was a study that was done in 2011 to 2013, which was looking at the future of the city of Detroit. We organized all the civic engagement with the technical team here with Stoss and Tony Griffin and Hamilton Anderson and so on. They for a lot of the work, we sort of engaged the civic engagement part, and then tied it in, blend it with the technical team. So to make that work, we were working and have been working for about 20 years at this point in the community, at the community scale, community scale. And the reason why we were brought into this is that originally the work was happening and people are saying, if you really are doing this work why isn't the design center a part of the work? So the community began to ask for us to be a part of this. And so we were invited and we began to work with this. What that did was say, how do we begin to understand the city and scale up from the work that we're doing at the neighborhood level now, but not lose the intent and intensity that we could do at the citywide scale. So this is a few things that I want to make some quick points. This is the scale of Detroit. When I first arrived, I heard about San Francisco, Boston, and Manhattan. These were the three cities. But unfortunately, these are not cities that are like the framework or structure of the city of Detroit. The city of Detroit is actually like most of our cities, sprawled out, very low density, and not these three cities. So we began to look at other cities, and this was done before this, but we brought this to the thinking. This is Detroit, 139 square land miles. And you have heard over and over and over again of how empty Detroit is and how the people have left the city. It's gone. There's no one there. There's 715,000 people there. It's down from 1.8 million. It's an empty city. Well, look at these cities. Atlanta, 132 square miles to our 139, 420. This is 2010, sorry, all of these have raised. Denver is actually the fastest growing city. They just surpassed us this year by estimates. They're the fastest growing city. They don't know where to put people. and we have the same population, and we have all this land. So we began to say, it's not about land use and population growth. There's so many other things. So this study was about economic growth. It was about city systems, neighborhoods. How do you celebrate the folks that have been there, not designing for folks that will come in? This work did not engage people that were not residents of the city of Detroit or business owners that were from the city of Detroit. This engaged people, 90,000 Detroit residents, one-on-one, we engaged in this process. This is a image from the collection of Henry Ford. It is the melting pot. It's a graduation ceremony. You see that person right there? They're wearing clothes from where they came from. And all around the pot are a bunch of white males like me doing this, stirring the pot. They walk down these steps. There's the handrail. Got to have a handrail. And inside here, they throw off their clothing and they put on this outfit here. And they come out and they're waving the American flag. This is a graduation ceremony for a school, right? A manufactured assimilation. This is right a part of Detroit. These are the issues that we have to confront and work with. We can't say, oh yeah, that just happened and now can't we just move forward? We have to address this, and in our work, we are addressing this all the time in our work. And I can go on and on, but I just wanted to give that. And to make the point again about gray versus a colorful composition, which is a mosaic. So, if we're thinking about celebrating people, what should we do? If I ask this side to go, or if I ask all of you to go to a dinner party, and this side goes to Brian's house because he has much better dinner parties than I do. So but Tom, I bet you actually has a better party. And this side decides to come to my house. There's a couple things I can do. But first of all, hi there. How you doing? I'm Dan. Nice to meet you. Oh my God, it's been forever. Can I have a hug? Oh no, thank you. Oh my God. Oh God. Hi there. Hello. How are you? Good to meet you. My God, it's been ages. So nice to see you. Yes. Good to see you. We really need to celebrate who's at the party. Detroiters have only heard over and over and over again how they're a bunch of prostitutes and pimps and drug addicts and so on, when that is so wrong, and that we need to design a city where people will come in, as I've already said. So what we did was try to develop a system that would celebrate who was there. So if you have a mosaic of people, then you need to have a mosaic of tactics to engage those people. Most people do not like to go to community meetings, large town hall meetings. None of us do. So why do we have to expect other people want to do that? So what we do is we define our tactics to engage those mosaics in two different ways. We first design a variety of ways to open up the process, and then we try to make that process meaningful. So first, that's the difference between entering the dialogue and celebrating dialogue. I'm not going to explain this chart, except that this was 1 year of engagement. This is how we got to 90,000 people. 23 different tactics that were used. And community meetings was there and there. That was it. We had a street team that we paid Detroiters to be in barbershops and hair braiding salons and bowling alleys, because that's the public space for many people, not the public square, not the town hall. And so they were paid, so neighbors talking to neighbor in this circumstance. What I'd like to point out is that the issue of saying, how do we actually become part of someone else's agenda versus ours, is that we begin to interrupt people's day-to-day lives. We create a thing called a roaming table. This is it there. This is Charles, our landscape architect, remember? The roaming table's here now. It moved. We saw 6,000 people, first of all, at this table, one-on-one, 6,000, because we would go to one place and we'd stay there for 3 to 4 hours. And we would do this 3 to 4 times a week for 8 months. There's Charles again. Charles, like me, lots of hand motions. And so you know I did it too. There it is. I was the one taking those photographs. So all of that, 90,000 people. So how do you make the dialogue more meaningful? Excuse me. is you try to design methods for the spontaneity of idea sharing. I mentioned this at lunch today. And one of the ways that we do, and for the students that are at lunches will be a repeat for you, we oftentimes in design are told to think of nouns. You know, whether it's I want a bus stop, I want a kitchen, I want a bedroom, I want an office space, I want a conference room, they're nouns. What we ask for our folks to do is to think about verbs that we can design from. So it's the difference between if I ask this room to think of a stair, they probably will all be stairs. They'll probably be different stairs, sorry, but they'll all be stairs, and it will still be incredibly limited. If I ask you to think of ascending and descending, the options for design widen. That's the intention here. So it's the difference between things and experiences. So this is us walking the neighborhood for a project I'll show you in a second. That's me there. Tagging the buildings with verbs there. And what we did is let me show this first, an alleyway that goes from here all the way down. All the garage doors along here are painted by graffiti artists, experienced graffiti artists. So this became an outdoor graffiti gallery. They like to say aerosol art because graffiti has the wrong connotation. This area here is what you just saw here. It's a training area. So they don't see this as beautiful graffiti. They understand that. There is some gang tagging there, but it's minimal. There's where the experienced graffiti artists who are painting on the garage doors are now working with the youth to teach them a craft of graffiti art. This is something that is done by an organization called Young Nation. It's an anti-gang initiative to transform this area. The community was, if you notice in this one image, there's a lot of other people walking with us here that are not the artists and are not from Young Nation, from the community that support this kind of work. They actually want their garage doors painted. So I'm going to actually show you, so I don't have to go back. That blue building will come up in a moment. This shows you some of the garage doors. This one's a St. Louis graffiti artist, so they invite artists to come in, and then they work with the local youth as well. This is back to the, we did these very quickly. We did a master plan, but then did these very quickly. Then we began to do a study of this. Actually is not of the same area, but it was the illustration, because I, for some reason, couldn't find the drawing. A study of how people moved through this area. Because it's important to us to begin to say that if you're going to redesign and work in this area, we have to begin to understand not just what people say, but truly analyze how they move through the space, so we don't just fill it back up. So what you'll see here is lines of trails that we've marked in this area, literal scars in the landscape. So these trails, if you see this is a yellow line. What does that show you? It says, well, there's something that from there to there, it sort of reveals an infrastructure. So if we're going to build this, should we then rebuild? Because this is where vacant land is now. So people are using vacant land to travel through. So instead of putting the street wall back up, perhaps now we think about this in a different way. We use this as guides as we move forward. And for us, because we don't see density in the same way, we define density in this way, that it's the complexity and intensity of human interactions. It's not about how many people and how many buildings we have. It's how do we amplify and layer interactions. So then back to this, I remember I did this. There's the blue building. This is something we just completed this last July. So TAP had those temporary spaces that are permanent, but they're seen as outdoors, so they can't really work on them all year round. This becomes a work and it's a renovation of an old seamstress that used to make mariachi clothing for the local mariachi bands. This is was done in collaboration with et al. Collaborative, and it just opened in July. The welding was a local welder from literally just a few blocks away. And of course, the painting was of the local of the folks from the place. The wall opens up, so because they wanted that. This was an intense series of 6 months working with them to work out exactly how the building should operate, and this was one of their of trying to find an affordable panel that would open the same wall, because we're tired of seeing garage doors everywhere, so we wanted to have something that was affordable and would open it up. So with that project shown, what we begin to try to think about is what's the difference between having a praxis and a practice. And so for us, praxis is investigating alternative ways of working. We're constantly trying to see how do we work, how do we think about, can we have an office and not just be seen as a practice? Can we look for alternative ways of working? At the same time, because we do that, people see us as an alternative practice. They'll say, well, you're an alternative practice. Well, that sounds fine, but the reality is, and it may sound cool, is that keeps you in the margin. And for us, we ask that how are we actually altering practice versus being an alternative practice? Can we change how we operate as offices? So I want to show some quick things here. This is an area, our office is going to be, it's opening up in a month. It's right there, if you saw my green pointer. That's the blue where it says UDM, that's our university. This is a study that we did originally working with community. So we wanted to have a community space on the commercial corridor. And then we found this space that was vacant. And so we were able to find funding to transform it very simply into what was called the Livernois Community Storefront. We wanted to illustrate, we did this installation, very low tech. It's colored tape and clear tape that was put on the floor. It lasted for months and months. That then was sort of highlighting what was going on the street. Had kids that were then had to put their cars on it. That led to trying to say, well, that had a 2-year lifespan, intentionally so. Can we do something that was more permanent? How can we do something? So this space here is going to be our new offices, but over half of it is dedicated to the same kind of use because of the success of that space even though it wasn't intended to be a business, a commercial space, for local residents tested ideas for businesses there and opened up businesses on the corridor, and they now walk to work, and they've lived there for decades, and now they have businesses there and thinking they couldn't do that. So this is the storefront as it stands. It's going to be turned into this. There's Charles again, that's me. Everyone in the renderings, we actually are from communities. We don't take images from the internet. We actually do a thing called a casting call, so people can come, we take their pictures, and they populate our renderings. Essentially, it's going to be a place where the city, institution, and the community have a place. And not just the communities, but there's community organizations that this is their main headquarters with us. This is the design, if you will. The front part here is all left open. We could fill this space, but we left it open for the block club meetings and so on, or other events that they would like to do if they want to test an idea there. And then the back is the workspace, conference room in the middle, loft, so we could close that area off. They could use conference room, restrooms, and so on. This is what the space looked like before we got to it. Those panels we loved. We didn't want to lose them, but we gained 4 more feet by taking them off. So those are what you see, that yellow-green wall. Those are those panels. We deconstructed and we're filling the wall with those panels. This was when we put our banner up. You saw the building, what it looked like before. We got a blight ticket for putting that up, and there wasn't a blight ticket on it the way it looked like before, which I thought was pretty amazing. So essentially, the city government gave itself a ticket because they have a space in here too, which we thought was kind of humorous. So there's the place. Trying to we're creating a bench, so we're asking people to loiter, if you will, in front. We're trying to say, no, this is okay. We're going to actually build in the street a place where people can sit as well. This is, after we took that panel off, this is what was above. Well, we cleaned it all up and added the HVAC. This is it, just a matter of about 2 weeks ago. That wood is where it's going to receive all that tin panel. And that terrazzo we did not put in, that was there. And no one knew it. It was covered and is really bad. So we literally scraped it all off. It's covered with all this bad glue, and that's the outside so far. So we truly try to work by taking ideas and testing them. And in the same way of the students, you saw this earlier today, we wanted to take a 4-lane road, turn it to 2, Livernois Avenue. People were skeptical of that. So we said, well, we worked with Better Block, that we began to say, can we actually begin to test the idea and literally close off an area? We had proposed this, and then someone actually knew Better Block, so we contacted them, learned from them, and we pulled this together. So we're not designing these bad little bollards. We just had to show, it's just a way to sort of quickly show that the parking is no longer against the curb, it's over here. This was, that guy there in the seat is actually our mayor. He even came out. This was our, the head of the design director, spray painting flowers on the ground to illustrate that we don't need, the crosswalks don't need to be a zebra stripe. They can be pieces of art. And so we wanted to illustrate, well, he wanted to be a part of illustrating that if the city is supporting this and not just us wild and crazy folks, and that it'll never get done. We always have stuff out for people to play and add and draw and comment, because ultimately what I have up there is that what we're trying to create is a cultural corridor, a place that celebrates culture and not just creating another commercial corridor, because we know what that'll bring. This is another project that the students saw earlier today. On the median, we had to create something that could withstand up to 50 or 60 mile an hour wind without foundation. So it's a bit heavy because of that. But it's intended to be as an armature for local artists, Detroit Fiberworks. They do constant classes in fiber art, and then this would be a place where they would display their work. So we're on the home stretch here. It's the last thing. So what is happening now? The thing that's concerning us a bit is that the things that make Detroit interesting, the cultural uniqueness of the place, people, even residents say, well, this is wonderful, but when can I have the Red Lobster? When can I have, and this, I would say, because many people, and it's hard for us to say, well, maybe you don't want that. Let's keep the cultural uniqueness that you have. But many folks feel that, you know, this was kept from them for so many years that why can't we have this? So there's a constant debate that the things that are attracting people to Detroit are the things that, and the things that the residents, the folks have been doing for decades that are finally getting attention. Because I love the dialogue. Oh, we were talking about this a little bit earlier today, the Renaissance of Detroit. Things have been going on for years. It's just that the narrative hasn't been balanced. Only the negative stuff is displayed, and now we're getting a few positive things. Yes, other things that are now offshoots of that, but the stuff that's been happening in the neighborhoods has been happening for years. So now folks see that, well, that's great. Let's move from that and have the things that every other city has. Can we have that but still keep the culture of the place? That's our question. This is just showing one of the areas in Detroit. Brightmoor was urban farming before very many other places with urban farming, and they came to us to design a house that's a bee interpretive center. And this is literally a loft for a beekeeper, and then the whole first floor is a bee interpretive center. This gap here is where the bee honeycombs would be. An outdoor classroom. This literally just started, so we have very rough stuff. I like to show this because I want you to see that I build models My hands are constantly being dirty with this stuff. And I think that both these things are appropriate. And then for the students, primarily to illustrate, because I do a lot of models, that with all the stuff that I've been showing you, I still want you to see that we think this way as well. And I think this way in particular, because these are all the models I've made in the last couple years. And you'll see a lot of them are the same because I'm thinking over and over and over again. They take me just like an hour or two to make because I just do them very, very quickly to explore. So with that, we talk a lot with our students and with folks that we work with that we try to distinguish between being a world-class architect and a famous architect. For us, the difference is that a world-class architect changes the world around them, no matter how small that world is, and they may never find themselves in a newspaper, they may never find themselves on a magazine or website, but they're changing the world around them. That's what we strive to do. We worked with, we were talking about this in a high school on the east side that we worked with for the last 7 years called Denby High School, and I was standing behind this guy right here, and if you look closely, he wrote on his thing, "Change the world." That was was for me to see him do that because he was saying at the beginning of us working with him, he was leaving Detroit, he wanted to get out of there, he couldn't wait, and now when I said, so what does that refer to? He says, I'm going to stay, I'm going to work in this place, I can't wait to get to make a difference, so on and so forth. That's what this is about. That's what we try when we mean that's world class. So with that, the things that you hear and see, like you see bushes and a rock and a human and a little hill to a house, we take for granted. We must question those things and begin to say, wait a minute, maybe the hill is now an Adam's apple, nose, a beard. We need to begin to take the things that we see and we hear, question our assumptions, questions the things we take for granted, flip it, and try to begin to say, no, this is still there, but there's other things there as well. With that, I say thank you very much and very open to questions and comments and so on. Well, there are days when I figure, what the F am I doing? You know, why am I? It's just, and not because of the people I'm working with, just because it just feels like you're always hit the bigger structures that prevent us from doing the things we're doing. Actually, to also say that because we're working day in and day out with folks that are in the community, and their energy and excitement is what builds our energy and excitement. It's not like I'm walking in and I'm filled with all this energy and they're all like, oh. I walk in and they are filled with excitement of what's going on, and then together we bridge that. I will say also that I grew up not having a lot of stuff, and that there's a lot of especially in the neighborhoods that we work in that don't have, they may not be the middle class and above. There's a sense of solidarity there that perhaps that I don't have when I'm working with other folks. So there's an excitement and energy there too that's more personal. And I always joke that my mom is here, and watching how she operated in a place that wasn't very different than some of the things that I'm working in is also purely personal. I always joke that she's there making sure that I don't F up. So there is a lot of that. But the other side, and actually the question about design, I would like to comment. Many people, and why I mentioned earlier that design is essential human need, the flip of that is when neighborhoods start having good design that don't have the narrative is folks get pushed out. And I'd like us to name a neighborhood in this country where investment occurred and people weren't pushed out. Gentrification didn't follow. We oftentimes hear in Detroit that gentrification is, we all could use a little gentrification. And I say no, because the simple definition of gentrification is investment with displacement, period. There's no complexity to that. So what we want investment without displacement. And how do you do that? And that's not a little bit of gentrification, it's just not gentrification. It's how do you, and to me, that is a design question because design is at the center. As soon as this, or one of the things at the center, as soon as we start designing, then we are part of the implements that are moving people out. So we need to begin to think about the policies that could be in existence that would help us still design while not losing the population that actually are making these neighborhoods places that people want to move into. Because we often say, oh, the quote unquote they, but you want to move into that neighborhood because they have been keeping it at a level that has been for decades. So we now need a way of celebrating existing folks as well as welcoming newcomers. It's not like we shouldn't welcome newcomers. We need to have the balance of both. Other questions? I do have a tendency to over-answer, as I said at lunch today too. I didn't actually repeat the first question. I should summarize. The question was, how do we function as a teach and a workplace, and how do students get involved? First, it is a requirement for our students to do a co-op, so they can apply anywhere. They really want to work with us, particularly students that are interested in this, mainly because they get involved in every aspect of the project. So we had a major meeting with about a new center, early childhood center opening up that we're working with right nearby our university, that's being designed by Marlon Blackwell. That's going to be almost exclusively for the kids that are in that neighborhood now, not the future kids. And so these students were in that meeting with us, with the community, with Marlon, with folks, seeing this activity happening. At the same time, they're doing work on computer models and physical models. At the same time, they're frankly taking notes at a meeting. They are at all aspects because we feel that's what's essential. So every meeting we have, they're present and accounted for. So that's the commitment we make, that we understand that the hours that they put in will not necessarily always attribute to productivity, which is the difference between if they're working in an office versus working for us. That sitting in a client meeting, they might be taking notes, but the bigger benefit is for them to hear what's going on, not the notes they're taking for us. I think your hand was up too. Okay, great. Without people, architecture's dead. Let's just put it that way, right? I mean, the architecture is alive because of people using it, right? If you were designing a library, would you think of not talking to the librarian? Would you, if you're designing a museum, would you not talk to the curator or the museum director? So why then is it so unusual to say that you're going to talk to the resident down the street or talk to other people? The more people we talk to, the richer our designs can be. So it isn't about, and I will clarify too, because I didn't say this, I sort of alluded to it in the first driving force of stakeholder expertise and discipline expertise. We are not saying that that everyone's designing together. What we're saying is that we're acknowledging that the museum curator has an expertise as well as the community resident down the street, as well as the business owner down the street, as well as the motorcycle club down the street. All of that, they all have expertise. We work together, share ideas, and then our expertise is design and pulling it together into the physical world. So they will be a part of extras. Like I could pull up really quickly a video that we play with Play-Doh. We take we make sort of boxes out of Play-Doh so they can squish them and play. And they smell it. They go, oh wow! I remember having this when I was a kid. So it's not intimidating. And then they will help us understand relationships and things. And then ultimately we take that and design from it for sure. Does that help answer the question? But I would say it's become it's like what's, green and sustainability was 10, 15 years ago. People are using the word engagement all the time because they think that's going to get them the job or get them, and most people are not doing participation or engagement. They're not just defining it wrong, they're just not doing it, but they think that's the stuff they need to say. So to answer it another way is that it's just a buzzword now. We are trying to illustrate that it should be much more than that, and that if you really are practicing it, you need to design the process in a very different way. Yes, the question was, how do we actually raise the values of an area, the cultural values, the values in general of an area, so people take note and they value them, so it's not necessarily seen like, okay, yeah, that's what they want, but we're going to come in and do what we want anyway. There's two parts of the question. One, I showed the Livernois-McNichols area for those who know the area. We've been working there for a while, but we don't typically do work there because that is an area where a lot of attention is starting to happen. We actually work in areas that no one's looking at, to be honest. The areas that have 80% vacancy and so on, like the graffiti gallery, though, it's mostly a dense area, but it has got the highest gang activity in the area, so people just try to stay away from that area. We usually work in areas that most people aren't looking at. That doesn't mean that gentrification isn't knocking at the door in the future. It will be. But it gives us some time to work with people together and say, okay, the work we're doing isn't just about the what you're doing here. We're trying to amplify it in a way, and we have a podium, if you will, to show the work to other places as models of what could happen if we celebrate the folks that are there now, and then begin to try to run dialogues that say, how can you do work that complements versus takes away? So, I'm trying to think of a specific piece. Well, in some respects, the graffiti gallery, to dive very much in the weeds, but maybe not. I was giving a talk specifically on that project in Minneapolis. Someone in Lisbon saw a YouTube video of me talking about that project in Minneapolis. So they contacted me saying, would you be willing to come to Lisbon and help us work on similar things there? I said, well, what you really want, yes, trust me, I've never been to Lisbon, I would love to go to Lisbon, but what you really want is you want the person who runs that institution to go, not me, and you want those kids to go, not me, but I would still like to go, so can you put us up in a house someplace, and then we don't have to be in a hotel, you save some money, I won't take an honorarium, pay for them to go, and then we all go over. And so what we did is we went over and we advised the equivalency, these kids, to the students that were there today. I showed you Freddie, that was his first trip over to Europe. He was a part of advising Portuguese equivalent of the US's Hyde, showing that how to work in neighborhoods. They were there, we gave talks, we ran a whole workshop together. They let Young Nation organize the workshop. So then we came back and we publicized all that work to Detroit, showing how that work is seen internationally as being a positive thing. If it was just me, it's just some architect, right? And we are seen as so that's what we mean by amplifying as well. Trying to say, yes, it would have been fun for me to go by myself, but really it was a hell of a lot more fun to do it with all of them, and we could change the mindset. So then they've been invited now without me to Portuguese 2 more times to make that connection. So they've been going back and forth now, working together there, in a way that perhaps would never have happened with that first initial thing. So it's not exactly answering your question, but that's the first sort of a way of how do we sort of bridge the gap and begin to illustrate. And so all that work has been shown around Detroit, trying to help illustrate the power, and we shouldn't be losing that kind of activity.
So it doesn't have to be so much about the image or the type of
No,
architecture. Really.
not at all.
It's really only about the system.
Mm-hmm. It depends on how. I would say the architecture can complement the system, but it's not only about the image. It's not only about the thing, for sure. That's why I don't mind showing those panels with not beautiful paintings on them, and the panels aren't exactly constructed very well. We did them in a weekend, we did them very quick. We think we have other examples of crafted design, but to us, that's crafted too. It's just craft in a different way of thinking. We have very, very monocular view of what craft means sometimes, and when we talk, and to us, that's craft as well, which supports the system that they have. They actually take those panels off. After a while, they have so much paint on it, and then they take the panels off, put new panels on, and then they line the alleyway in between the garage doors with the panels too, now and then, which is pretty fun. I'm sorry, Chris.
Like the generation of a new vernacular.
Yeah, exactly. Anything else? Yes.
Improvement?
Well, first of all, I would say it's not necessarily my idea. when you the question was how the project that we showed, which was taking the community center and then making it an overlook. How do we convince the government? We luckily now that's a good idea. I would first say that it was really the idea of the community. We just gave it the design and visualization of it, and sometimes when things get so contentious, people are open for things that maybe they weren't open before. We were brought into the process because there was a strong contention between the community and outside forces, and so we were able to come in. Thankfully, the city planning department wanted to find ways to be more creative with it as well. So the city planning department there, Maurice Cox is the director, and we worked together and were able to illustrate that you can do something more playful with the community center than versus just demolishing it. So it was more of a dialogue than just coming up and saying, let's convince you of this. And that's why it can be more successful, is we really try to have it as the issues are confrontational. We're not denying that. But we then try to find ways to bring the folks together in a dialogue. It's essentially, if you're familiar with restorative practices, the circle, bringing people around in the circle to have a conversation about what could be seen as very, very confrontational, but then through the dialogue, things can develop out of that. We work through that process. We train folks in working through that process in a variety of different ways. But that's a whole other lecture. Just send me an email, because we don't have a formal process. If the question was how students apply, we don't have a formal process in terms of outside schools. With our school, we do. We have the best time to be doing it would be fall or summer, because it's when we can hire more in the summer, and we rarely get students from our program in the fall. The winter is always more hard. Though we had a student from University of Oregon and University of Texas at Austin in last winter. So you never know. So, and the other part of the point was the way we define our practice as more than just architecture, but landscape, urban design, planning. We have in a firm of 8 full-time professional built environment professionals, because we have, as you saw, we have a business manager and so on. We actually have all 4 of those disciplines represented, not just like dabbling in them. Charles is a landscape architect. He does lectures every year at the ASLA. Sierra is an architect and a planner. We work through these various disciplines, understanding that each one of them have different expertise and that we can learn from each other, and that's essential to how we operate. The question was another sort of way of thinking about passion and how I try to think about beyond the myself but others in the world. I would say I actually went to Georgia Tech, but there was a 2-year period where a local faculty member at the time, who was only a few years older than me as a grad student, he was a faculty. His name was Jim Williamson, and he brought John Hyde, and many of the students probably don't even remember who this guy is, but he came for 2 years and worked with us regularly. And this stands for agitation propaganda. If you don't know what agitprop is, look at the old history of Russia. And Haydick would actually say, I'm going to paraphrase it very quickly, but go to a place where no one's going to make a difference. If you will, it's the same sort of way I talk about the being a world class, if you will. And the folks that I had in school and the people that I went to school with fuel the passion and energy that I have, but it also just comes from the family background. If I can embarrass her, my sister's actually in the audience over there, back there. So she came up from Kansas City to do this. We actually I've had family support in ways, even coming from the context I came from, the strong family support has always allowed me to be able to have this kind of passion. And I'm so blessed to be able to do what I do. I feel that I have the best job in the world. So, yeah, thank you.